Okay, welcome everybody to our September webinar, 2017 Top Energy Reduction Tactics webinar. Excited to kick off fall. I'm taking the liberty of going a couple of days forward and saying it is fall already. What we'll do is we'll get started with some introductions. We've got some wonderful guests here for our discussion today. We're going to review some of the survey results, a survey that was a follow-on to a sustainability survey that we did at the beginning of the year, that then followed on, and the survey really goes into what we have well over 100 respondents and what they're doing in terms of their energy efficiency project. Then we're going to get into a discussion with our guests, talking a little bit about commitments, formal, informal commitments that their organizations have made, that they personally have made, and how they work towards those. We're going to talk a little bit about the top initiatives that they have seen and that they have embarked on. And we'll talk a little bit about metrics and data, because data is fun. So we'll talk a little bit about measuring things, tracking things, and reporting out. And then we'll open it up for Q&A. I would encourage everybody to also use the question feature in their in the GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar. And if you have questions along the way, feel free to type them in. And if we can, we'll catch them right then and there. If not, we'll also accumulate them for the end and then go through them at the end. Okay, from there, my name is Rolf von Soesen. I run marketing and product and the service groups here at Lucid. I'm joined by Abby, who also runs our customer programs here at Lucid.
Thanks, Rolf. Glad to be here.
Excited to have you. Then we've got coming to us from the eye of the hurricane, Ian Lahey from the city of Orlando.
Thanks for having me.
We really appreciate you making the time, and especially with all the stuff you've got going on. Then we've got Dana Jennings from LinkedIn, who is going to be running from this webinar to their anniversary celebration of their net zero building in Sunnyvale. Hi, Dana.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And last but not least, we've got Justin Owen from Weber State University coming to us from Utah.
Yes, thank you for saying Weber, not Weber. I appreciate that. Glad to be here.
So, well, it's going to be really fun to kind of have a lot of the learnings. And you may know, we've got some really interesting perspectives here from a major metropolitan city, from a corporate technology customer company, and then from a university. So it's going to be really interesting perspectives in the conversation, I think. So with that, what I'd like to do is hand the time over to Abby, who's going to review the surveys that we've done this year and what we've learned from them. Oh, Abby?
Thanks, Rolf. So this all kicked off this winter, really, and then leading into spring, we became really curious about how our customers and organizations across the country are approaching sustainability now, and especially with the changes in the federal administration. So with less support from an administrative level, we launched a survey with our partner Urginet to figure out where various industries' perspectives were on the topic. So that was our spring 2017 Sustainability Outlook survey. And by and large, we found that organizations remained very committed to sustainability, if not more so than they were before. So we were really intrigued by this. And we decided to run a follow-up survey. And instead of focusing on the commitment to sustainability, instead we dove into the how this time. So we focused on particularly on energy and energy reduction tactics, but we were focusing on what initiatives they're using to reach their goals, how they're making their goals, and what is being successful in their work so far. So we've published an ebook with the results of this survey, and we found some really fascinating results. So we'll dive into a few of the questions and results, and then we'll have the panelists touch on their perspectives as well. So we have a few highlights of the questions we asked in the survey here, and we had, for each survey, we had more than 100 sustainability, energy, and facilities professionals from across industries answer. So we have a really great kind of depth of response here. So we're asking about how people are setting their sustainability and energy reduction targets, how they're achieving them, how they're prioritizing projects, what metrics are important to them, how they're reporting, and where they found the most success. So I wanted to highlight a few of what I found to be the most notable responses. So this first one is actually from that first survey, and it's why we conducted the follow-up. We found that 90% of the organizations that responded remain committed to sustainability or even increasing their commitment to sustainability this coming year. And we found that really impressive. So we wanted to dig in and figure out how they're actually achieving that. We found that half of the respondents in our most recent survey have actually formalized climate or sustainability targets. And the vast majority, so about a third in addition to that, have informal targets. So that means that it's only a handful of organizations really that don't yet have sustainability or energy reduction targets. So we wanted to focus on organizations who are working towards these targets and figure out how they're getting there. One of the, I think, most important findings is that 3/4 of respondents reported that business performance was a significant influencer on their energy projects. So these organizations aren't just acting sustainability because they feel good about it, but because it's also good for their bottom line. And that's true across corporations, that's true for K through 12 districts and universities, that's true for municipalities. It's really across the board that it is beneficial, and whether it's profitable or creates energy savings that can be reinvested in their community. Across the board in different markets, sustainability is good for business. So one of the questions we asked on this survey was, what are the most important metrics used to track the success of your program? So the results came in, this was a 1 through 5 ranking, with 5 being the most important. Once again, this actually looks a little off here, but the cost and consumption overall are the 2 most important metrics. Employee productivity, occupant comfort, greenhouse gas emissions even, which we expected to be higher, all fell in below the energy metrics themselves. So another question then following up on that is, how do you prioritize your initiatives to reach your energy reduction targets? And we had a clear winner here as well. This was on a 1 through 7 scale, with 7 being the highest prioritization. Building upgrades, so upgrading building hardware, whether it's from lighting, HVAC retrofits, any sort of hardware upgrade, was the most prioritized initiative. And after that was the focus on data, so better measurement and tracking. And I think this is key. The building upgrades are often the low-hanging fruit because that's tangible and easy to see where you can improve. But after that, the question is, where do you start? And that's where the data comes in. So once you're able to measure and track your energy use and other resource use, then you can start working on the next tier of initiatives, improving scheduling, how to engage occupants, and work on reducing plug loads. And then you can figure out how to reduce peak demand. Renewable energy generation, energy storage coming a little bit behind. With energy storage here, you can see being the least prioritized initiative. And this question goes hand in hand with a follow-up on not just how do you prioritize your initiatives, but where are you finding success? So the same answers here applied, and there was only one difference in the ranking, and that was in peak demand management and renewable energy generation. So it makes sense. People are prioritizing initiatives that they know to be successful, and that starts with building upgrades and improved data. Those are the clear 2 winners here. So going back just for a quick comparison to the prioritization. The distribution is pretty similar. The only difference here is that people found a little more success in peak demand management. So I think this really highlights some interesting points, and we wanted to bring some of our customers across industries to share their perspectives.
All right, fantastic. So that's really interesting. I mean, I think one of the things that was a key driver always is consumption and cost, right? I mean, I think that we found that in the sustainability survey, that I think that was really exciting for us to see that private and public institutions are driving this because it's the right thing to do for them. And we've gotten way past the point where the driver of it really is federal mandates or government mandates or anything like that. It just becomes a matter of, and when I say the right thing to do, I think it depends on the organization, and you know, financial drivers are really a key component of that. And we're finding that that's what's happening, is these institutions and these organizations are finding a way to do this. And I love the point about the low-hanging fruit and then getting to the next level of detail. And I think that's something that's we're gonna hear more about from our panel here as well, is there's sort of that low-hanging fruit and then sort of finding that next level. And probably that's one of the things that sort of, when we talk about what makes an energy hero and the people that we're working with in our organization that I've had the pleasure to meet and work with, is these are the folks that are digging a little deeper. You know, day by day, they're curbing the energy use, they're reducing the carbon impact and the environment, they're increasing the organization's savings. And those two things at the end just really go together hand in hand. I think the days are long gone when these things are seen as conflicting goals, and they're definitely goals that go hand in hand and help each other out. So in terms of these energy heroes that work tirelessly and really find those savings for their companies, let's meet the three that we have with us today. So Ian, if you could give a quick introduction, that'd be great.
Sure, thanks, Ralph. My name is Ian Lahiff. I work for the City of Orlando as the Energy Project Manager. My job as a mechanical engineer by training is to go through all of the city's infrastructure, portfolio of buildings, and really identify and then implement energy saving solutions, energy conservation measures through all of our buildings, including fire stations, police stations, community centers, and the city also owns and operates our own stadiums and performing arts centers and arenas too, which is a little bit unique. So there's quite a diverse array of buildings and over 6.4 million square feet of space that we have to work with. It's pretty exciting, and I certainly enjoy what I do. One of the things that we're really focused on is, as of May, the mayor signed on to the support for powering the city entirely with renewable energy by 2050, and for all municipal operations to be run off renewable power and renewable sources by 2030. This was in response to the backing out of our federal government from the Paris Accord. We signed on with 60 other mayors from across the country as part of Sierra Club's Mayors for 100% Clean Energy Initiative. So in addition to my energy conservation measures and trying to save energy costs for the city, I'm now tasked with trying to get my buildings as net zero ready as possible.
Fantastic, and again, all the best wishes from everybody here to, as you're digging out from Irma.
Oh yeah, we're certainly still reeling from that. We have over 66% of our county not having electricity still, and half of the state does not have electricity. So people are out of their shelters, they're back at their homes trying to assess the damage. We're working on that all across the city. But Orlando is really known as a city that can bounce back, that's very resilient. And out of our GreenWorks initiatives, which I hopefully get a chance to talk about in a little bit, the green economy and resilient built infrastructure is one of our focus areas as well.
Great. Well, it's wonderful to hear that. And we'll need to make sure to get you one of those Lucid solar backpacks so you can at least charge your iPhone and stuff.
All right. It'll be good for the next hurricane.
That's right. So speaking to someone who already has or is getting a Lucid solar powered backpack today, Dana.
Hi, I didn't know about that. That's exciting.
Yeah.
So my name is Dana Jennings. I'm on the global sustainability team here at LinkedIn. And I work on projects all around from carbon neutrality, airline emissions, energy efficiency in our real estate offices, and travel, etc. So we have over 11,000 employees at 30 global sites. So my role is pretty global in scale. And we are also committed to 100% renewable energy. So Ian, we could talk about that at some point. And in terms of energy efficiency, we've really just been benchmarking our usage, setting up goals, and then in particular in one of our Silicon Valley offices, we have invested in a net zero energy building. And so I've been focused on that over the past year, working to get the occupants to behave in a way that helps us meet our target goals. And Lucid has helped us facilitate an energy conservation competition that was quite successful. So I'm here in this building today, and we're going to be celebrating that at lunch.
Well, thank you, Dana. And then we also have Justin with us from Weber State. Justin?
Yeah, thank you. So Weber State's a primarily commuter campus. We have about 27,000 students, and we're located north of Salt Lake City in Ogden, Utah. We've got a goal to be carbon neutral by 2050, and we actually have a plan to go building by building to get there by 2040. If I were to condense our approach down to 4 points, it would be to maximize efficiency, electrify all the end uses of energy on our campus, source that electricity renewably, whether it's generated on campus or off, and then reinvest all of our savings. So right now we have a $5 million revolving green fund, and that I can borrow from, use that money to pay for energy projects. For example, some of our more exciting projects lately, we have a 1.8 megawatt solar array that powers one of our satellite campuses. We have our first ground source field. It's about 400 tons, and it's up and running, and our second ground source field is currently being installed. So a big part of my job as energy manager is to calculate what those actual savings are, go back to my administration, say that I saved this much money, and then I put whatever I've borrowed from the green fund gets paid off with energy savings every year and we also generate financial return for the university at a rate of 3%. So any more money I borrow, I pay back at 3%. So that's kind of our approach in a nutshell. So far, we've reduced costs by 44%, and we've reduced our greenhouse gas emissions by 30%. That's while the campus has grown from 2 million square feet to almost 3. So that's Weber State in a nutshell.
Wow, that's some crazy stats. So I mean, that's really great performance, and I think it'd be really interesting to hear a little bit more later on about how you, in sort of this unique way, finance your efforts, because it's sort of I just find it fascinating how you guys kind of started this years ago as almost like its own little business, if you will, and how you've sort of grown it internally. So congratulations on all that, Justin.
Well, thank you.
So from here, let's talk a little bit about some of the from the panelists about some of these major topics. And I think first and foremost, starting with any of these initiatives, start with kind of putting some formal, informal commitments, some goals in place. And I think it's there's always advantages and disadvantages to having some of these commitments, and who sets up these commitments, who's involved in reaching them. And Ian, maybe you can kick us off on this in terms of how this works in a city organization. I think this is going to be really interesting from a city perspective versus a private or kind of a corporate perspective, and then from a university perspective. So Ian? Do we lose you, Ian, or are you on mute?
Yep, sorry about that, guys. Thanks for the reminder. Yeah, one of the things about Orlando is that we really look at ourselves as kind of this progressive purple middle ground in a sea of diversity and a lot of basically a red state. So one of the things that we really strive for is stakeholder engagement. And our mayor appointed a 20-member task force that helps make recommendations for the community action plan. We also have an internal municipal action plan. And those task force members are broken up into smaller roundtables that incorporate business owners, community organizers, and folks representing all different industries across the city. So it's really a collaborative process. If we're going to be putting goals in the community action plan, we want them to be, smart, measurable, achievable, and really relevant to what we're trying to do within Orlando. We like to say that we're the tip of the spear, especially in the Southeast when it comes to sustainability, but we're also aware that there's a lot of other cities out there that are doing some great things and may have a different political atmosphere to work within. So for us, it's really key to engage with the community as we're putting the goals together.
And Dana, how about you? I mean, I think it's interesting that, in a situation where the city is taking on certain goals and making certain commitments, and politics kind of play into that. I imagine for you, that's less of a case, and it's a lot more of a profitability question for you.
Yeah, our process was definitely a lot more internal. We don't have as many external stakeholders as a city would have. So really what we did was in 2014, we did our first benchmarking footprint exercise, collecting all of the global data, taking a look at it. At the same time, we partnered with an external consulting firm to do an industry analysis and see what other industry peers are doing, what commitments they've made, and then sort of pulled together, a combination of aspirational goals and practical goals, what would work for us, and worked on setting them. I think one of the biggest challenges is with a global company like ours is setting a simplified overarching goal and then trying to get that to trickle down, and especially when some of the impacts are so local, like waste and water use and energy, they're actually all very local. And so it was difficult to say, 10% reduction or 100% renewable energy when there's all these different factors at play at 30 different sites around the globe. But I think the advantage of goals and commitments is that they give validity to the program. They give a sense of purpose. You can always call on them when you're making your business case. And so that's been probably the most useful aspect.
So what I'm hearing is sort of this global overarching theme that you have, but then it's like, because I think you would have some places where, say, your London office, for example, that might already be a lot more efficient than your Sydney, Australia office or your Chicago office. And how do you then get all those to a unified goal and a unified way of tracking them?
Yeah, exactly. Especially in an industry and a young company that's growing quickly and renovating space frequently. It's not like we can set really aggressive energy efficiency targets when we're revamping our space so frequently and upgrading. So those have been the challenges. But overall, I think it's been really beneficial to have goals and a commitment, like I said, to get the business case and buy-in from stakeholders.
Yeah. So Justin, then to you, I imagine in your case, everything is a little more centralized and command and control, since you are talking about one physical campus that is fairly normalized, if you will, compared to, an office in Singapore and an office in Dublin, Ireland.
Yeah, as far as the actual commitment is concerned, that came from our university president in 2007. They signed on to the American, I'm trying to remember the acronym, ACUPCC, American Climate College and Universities President's Climate Commitment. And honestly, I'm not sure they knew what they were getting into at that point. 10 years ago, we want to be carbon neutral. Do we really know what that means? But you're absolutely right. The fact that we're all, we do have satellite campuses, but we're all within, a 20-mile radius here in northern Utah. And it allows us to standardize on light fixtures, standardize on HVAC systems, standardize on some of our motors and our pumps and things that we're installing, both in new construction and renovations. And as the energy manager, that gives me a lot of influence in the design process. If we're building a new building, I can get a hold of the construction documents, look at the lighting designs, look at the building envelope, the windows, all of these things that affect energy. And we've come up with a very standardized approach in order to make our buildings as efficient as possible.
Yeah, great. So moving forward, going back now into the tactics, right? And what tactics have you found to be sort of the most successful, least successful, and how you're prioritizing energy and sustainability tactics, which again to me is very interesting with sort of the backdrop now of where Ian in Orlando has a very broad set of types of buildings, I'm talking fire station versus a library, where Dana, you have very similar buildings. They're all people working on computers in offices, but all around the world in very different environments. And then Justin, you have sort of one campus. So, Ian, maybe you can get us started again in terms of when you're thinking about your tactics, how are you evaluating your tactics and how are you prioritizing them?
Yeah, so one of the things that we first did is the city went out and saw the benefit of having an internal team to work on this type of energy conservation measures based on the success we had with the Recovery Act, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. We got about $1.7 million from that. We saw a huge return, upwards of 28-30% on some buildings. The city went out and got a bond to finance internal renovations for 10 times the Recovery Act amount. So roughly $17 million, and now it's up to $20 million. But to take that money and then apply it to all these disparate buildings, like you just mentioned, is a difficult thing to do, especially when you have a fire station versus a arena or a stadium. One of the things we did is we took a good inventory of all of our facilities and determined what the energy use intensity is of each of those buildings. We tried to normalize that as best that we could so that we could really understand at a square foot level, how are these buildings being used and consuming energy. Some of them are really big outliers. We operate 3 wastewater treatment plants that handle up to 40 million gallons a day. So throwing all of the pumping and that sort of stuff out the window, I don't have as much ability to affect that, but I still was able to put together a roadmap of all of our different facilities, ranking them from highest energy use intensity and down, and found a top 55 hit list that we're working on right now. We've gone through that hit list. We did ASHRAE level 2 audits. We've determined what are the best energy conservation metrics and their paybacks. And now we're kind of going through those as projects and procuring the items and doing the installation. And of course, we're looking to Lucid for the measurement and verification at the tail end of the projects to make sure that we're hitting our goals.
I was on mute. So Dana, how about you in terms of the tactics you found and how you prioritize some of your initiatives?
Yeah, well, for us, I think one of the first things we did was just work on getting visibility into the data and working on demand management and scheduling, because like I said, we tend to be in more leased spaces. We tend to be in more recently renovated spaces, so there's not as much opportunity for big upgrades. So we worked on, we partnered with another external group to do energy tracking and peak demand shaving. And so we saw a lot of quick results from that, especially because it was something we hadn't done before. And so I think for me, the lesson learned is really not just telling site managers, we need you to reduce by 5%, good luck, but providing them with tools and data, because otherwise they don't know what changes to make. And if they make a change, they don't know how much they've saved. So you really need that feedback loop where they make a change and the next week they go on and they see that it reduced this much, and then they do another one. They really need to be able to trial and error and see what works best. So I think that's been a learning lesson for me in this role.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely data driven, right? I mean, that's what what we're hearing and what we kind of saw out of the study and the survey is that that's sort of the next phase of going through that. Justin, how about you in terms of I mean, obviously from what you're saying before, you're very focused on the ROI, as that is sort of a very immediate payback that you're looking for from how you're funding these activities, right?
Yeah, so as we were first developing our revolving green fund, it was very important for us to be able to pay off the debt that we were accruing with our energy projects. So at first, we were prioritizing projects with an exceptionally fast payback. You know, you're talking 2 years, days in some cases. We're not afraid to think out of the box, but you know, at first what we really went after was our steam distribution system. That was really our first major project, was re-insulating those lines, getting rid of leaks, you know, replacing steam traps, and we also implemented a summer shutdown mode. So we shut down our boilers, our central boilers during the summer. That saves us a lot of money. Now we're at a point where we're transitioning to you know, ground sourced, water cooled, variable refrigerant flow systems for all of our HVAC. We're about a quarter of the way through with that on our campus, and we're about 40% through with our LED upgrade. So now we're at the point where we're generating enough savings that I kind of just looked for projects that clear the bar, you know, a 10-year payback. 10% ROI is what I prioritize now. And the other thing I like to look for is projects that will generate some sort of outreach opportunity or some sort of publicity for the university. So for example, we were a very early adopter of LEDs in our basketball arena. As far as I know, we were the first NCAA arena Division I to go all LED. That was back in 2011. Another project like that is we're the only university in the state of Utah with an all LED performance theater. So I'd say primarily when I'm prioritizing projects, it's about the energy payback.
Right. Yeah. Have the LEDs in the basketball arena helped you get some more wins on the basketball team?
Oh, I mean, Damian Lillard did it all right. So.
You know, you said kind of 10% is kind of your hurdle rate. Ian and Dana, do you guys have like a specific ROI, a specific payback that you look for?
Yeah, so we based a lot of what we know we can accomplish off of the experience we have with the Recovery Act. We shoot for about a 7-year payback, and we know that overall we're going to have some projects that are going to be a little bit longer than that, but we're going to have a lot of quick wins. You know, we're going to have a lot of those LED projects that pay back in 2 or 3 years, but some of the larger, more HVAC intensive projects might be a little bit longer than that. So as an overall average, we shoot for that 7. I think the actual number based on my roadmap is like 6.53 years or something like that, but we've been tracking pretty close to that so far.
Great. And Dana, how about you?
I would say, we don't have a set hurdle rate here. It sort of varies by project, and because we have so many variables, so many sites, and we're also very employee productivity focused. So we take that into consideration as well. What impacts would it have on our employees, on their experience at LinkedIn, on their productivity, and that's a big factor in our decision making.
See, that's different than Justin, because Justin just keeps turning down the heat in the library because it makes people study better.
It's actually the complete opposite, but okay.
Hey, one quick question I have for all of you guys, and what made me think of this is Dana sort of knowing part of the story for the net zero building. One of the things that I think you guys were a little bit surprised with was the impact of plug load and how much that drew from making it a net zero building. And I just wanted to throw out to all of you, because all of you have sort of this very systematic, data-driven way of going about and finding different projects and tactics. But are there things that you were kind of surprised by, or things that you weren't expecting that you're like, oh, I didn't think of that? Or are there any sort of lessons learned that you guys have?
Well, I guess I could just elaborate on that story a bit. Yeah, when our net zero energy building was designed, the energy engineers put in place a model of typical consumption. And originally we were thinking there would be a sort of a light touch team, such as communications or human resources in the building. And then because of a lot of other factors, it ended up that our engineering team sat in the building, and they tend to use heavy computer equipment and multiple towers and screens. And so, as you said, our plug load was off the charts. And so we've had to work within those limitations and educate our employees on that. And it's just been a good learning experience, because I think there's a big gap between building design and then occupant behavior, and just small things that you don't think of, like every workstation has a controlled outlet, but the cords wouldn't reach into that for their screens if they were in standing mode. So it was like, okay, distribute extension cords and, you know, all these little hacks that we had to do to get the building to work like we thought it was going to work when we opened it.
That's a great story. I'm gonna, the extension cords of the standing monitors, I'm gonna remember that one.
Right.
Justin or Ian, anything you guys have?
I think one of the kind of eye openers for us is that when we started to go into these buildings and talk with the building occupants, some of them are firefighters, lieutenants, some of them are community center organizers and managers that deal with before and after school care. We found that what we had on the old blueprints of the building and what we expected to find were very different. When we walked into some of these buildings, a lot of the facilities and the rooms in those facilities were being used, you know, in a more unique way or in a different way than they were originally designed. So we found pottery and kiln rooms that would have been more popular back in the 80s are now being used as a Zumba room. And they put a bunch more lights in there, but now they don't have the electrical load of this, you know, electric kiln. So we tended to work with that end user and come up with a solution that was going to fit how they were intending to use that facility in the future, as opposed to how it was originally designed back in the day.
Yeah, and there's a word that I didn't think was going to come up today, which is Zumba.
Yeah.
Justin, anything from you before we go on to the next topic?
Our experience has been a little interesting because as we've moved towards these LED retrofits and these VRF retrofits, we've kind of taken some of the decision making away from our occupants as far as not how the space is being used, but how the energy is being consumed. You know, we have occupancy sensors. They're really vacancy sensors on all of our lighting. But the really interesting thing, at least from my point of view, that we do is we give everybody their own thermostat. Every workspace has their own terminal VRF unit, and it's resulted in much better energy performance, but it's also resulted in greater occupant comfort in those buildings.
Great. Well, that's fantastic. And I think what we've seen is it really sort of does, I think our survey findings fall in line with what we've heard in terms of looking at the building upgrades, but also this better measurement and tracking and focusing on the data and letting that drive the decisions. Next, sort of the last big topic here is reporting on success, because I think that's also started to be a lot more important for various reasons. I think for reasons of obviously getting funding, of reporting to these more formal initiatives and measurable goals, in terms of occupants being interested in what's happening in these buildings and so forth. So maybe we can go around the horn, starting with Ian again, in terms of, why don't we start with Dana this time, in terms of reporting on the success. Like, who does your information go to? How do you compile it? What metrics do you share? If you can maybe talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is definitely an area that we're still improving on. But what we've done is for the past 3 years, we've collected annual energy and water consumption and used that to benchmark our sites and our operations. We've kept that mostly internal for our sustainability team and then key stakeholders within the company. But since the Microsoft acquisition of LinkedIn last year, we're now participating through them in the CDP and GRI reporting. And so we're also now sharing our data publicly under the scope of Microsoft. And so it's elevated our program, it's elevated our reporting efforts. And yeah, and I think with Lucid in particular, it's been very helpful to have most of the data in one site and be able to pull it more easily and then visualize it at more of a rapid pace than just once a year, you know, and being able to get in there and see it weekly or monthly or whatever format it tends to be in.
Justin, how about you in terms of reporting? I'm sure by now you guys have a really sort of set rhythm over there at Weber State.
We do. So when I think about reporting, I think about there's reporting that takes place within our facilities management group that's primarily either to myself, our sustainability officer, or my superior, who's also an energy manager. And there we're looking at things like what's our peak demand on campus. We've reduced it from 8 megawatts to 4.5. What's peak demand in buildings? What's our scheduling like? There's all of these internal metrics that are constantly circulating among our energy and facility staff. And I'd give props to Lucid for creating good tools like, the heat map, the trending that you can do. It gives you very powerful analytics that are easy to share. Externally, I want to avoid technical jargon with our financial team. And so when I report to our vice president on my energy savings for the year, I give him one number, and it is the dollars that I can claim that's left over in the utilities account at the end of the fiscal year. And that simplifies the process. I meet with him once a year, and like I said, our facilities team is doing all sorts of things with Lucid in the background, but when our VP sees the number, he can take that and he can compare it to what's left in the account, and it lends a lot of credibility to the energy program when the savings are real and they're actually realized.
Yeah, very tangible way of looking at it in the language that they care about, right?
Right. I'm not talking to accountants about weather normalization or energy usage. I'm saying dollars.
Right. Yeah. So Ian, I imagine you have quite a few stakeholders on your end.
Yes, and similar to Justin, what I try to do really at the end of a project or at the end of a fiscal year is roll up that information in easy to understand CFO level terminology. So we do that. We have to report that internally to make our payments on the municipal bond that offers us the opportunity to do all of these projects. But externally, the city is charged with a lot more transparency. And in fact, we've signed on to several different commitments, one of which is the Better Buildings Challenge with the U.S. Department of Energy and the EPA. So all of our consumption information has to be reported up through Energy Star. More recently, we just passed a citywide ordinance that all buildings, external buildings to the city, so shopping malls, commercial buildings, multifamily housing, over 50,000 square feet have to report their energy and water consumption. That goes into effect next year, but for this year, the city is kind of stepping up to the scale ourselves and leading by example, and we are being transparent with all of our facilities that are over 10,000 square feet and showing that information through Energy Star. We utilize Building OS to be able to gather that information and then push to Energy Star to meet those compliance metrics.
Okay, great. Well, I think it's to me it's amazing how we've just kind of scratched the surface, I think, in terms of how different your individual worlds are in a lot of these, like when you think about the stakeholders, where you think about the where the money, where the funds come from, and so forth. But I think what's really interesting to me, I think there's sort of three things that tend to be very common. One is listening to your end user, whether those are the occupants, the firefighters, the Zumba instructors, the students, or the programmers versus the communications department folks. And then also thinking about the stakeholders that you have to report out to, whether it is for municipal funds reporting, whether it is to the school, or whether it is sort of basically to the CFO in a private corporation. And then just sort of reporting on and reinvesting of savings. And I think that's it's actually, I think that's interesting, because that's where there's actually I think a lot of differences in terms of how the money actually flows in and how it's allocated. But the thing that's exactly the same is that you better know to the cent how much money you're taking in and how much you're saving, right, in terms of that. And then the last is, we talk about better data and better buildings. So with that, if there's sort of a last shout out from Dana or Justin or Ian to sort of conclude this, that'd be great. And then we'll go into some Q&A.
Well, I would just encourage anybody that's listening to check out cityoforlando.net/greenworks. The few items that I talked about today is really one of 7 different focus areas that we have as part of our Mayor's Greenworks initiatives. It covers all different aspects of municipal and community operations with focus on sustainability. So I'm sure you can share my contact information, and I would just encourage people to go check out the GreenWorks program we have.
Great, yeah, and I would just say thank you everyone for listening, and I think don't be intimidated by anything. Any project can get approval. You can do whatever you want to do. I think sometimes we come across as more organized and with it than it really is, and so I just want to put that out there for everyone.
There you go. Justin, how about you?
I don't think I really have anything else to add. I think I'll go check out Ian's website.
Hey, the one question that we have in, we actually answered quite a few of them as we went along, so I really appreciate that. So maybe as a concluding remark, one of the things, Justin, you can maybe just give a little bit more of an overview about how you guys set up this fund and this sort of perpetual fund that you have in terms of the university there.
Yeah, so what happened is, you know, in 2007, our university president said, hey, we want to be carbon neutral. And then that fell to my predecessor to figure out how to do it. And, you know, they had about $150,000 in one-time funding, and that had come as a result of pursuing utility rebates. And so my predecessor said, okay, we need some sort of sustainable funding mechanism. What does that look like? And I'm sure everybody's listening everybody that's listening is familiar with energy loans and ESCOs and all these different routes that you can take. Well, here at Weber State, we've got an internal facilities management team, and we have a lot of tradespeople that have expertise in, you know, all the trades: HVAC, plumbing, electrical, electronic service and repair, you know, boiler operation. We've got a whole team here. And so my predecessor said, you know, I think we can do a lot of this in-house. So that solved one portion. We have the expertise, but then getting the funds was a whole different story. So what has happened at Weber State is our administration has agreed to set aside $5 million of the cash management pool that would typically be invested in, you know, conservative investments, bonds, municipal corporate bonds, maybe some. I'm not sure exactly what their portfolio looks like, but they're used to having return on investment of 1% to 2%, right? These are very conservative, risk-free investments, and so my predecessor went to the finance team and said, hey, if you set aside this green fund, I will pay you back a 3% return. So I run that account into the hole every year. Right now, we're about $2 million in the hole, but right now we're also at almost $2 million in annual energy savings. So I'll pay off that debt as I accrue it, and I go to our chief financial officers once a year, and we reconcile all my debt, and I say, okay, I owe you guys, you know, $60,000. And so that's really one of the keys to keeping this revolving fund going, is that annual return for the investment team that keeps them very happy.
Yeah, I think that's just I think a great story and a great example of how by crossing the boundaries between facilities, between finance and other groups, you can actually get more creative and allocate more money. On the last,
Can I mention one more thing? I apologize for interrupting. So on the energy savings side, we sat down and we negotiated with our finance team, and really we look at it as there's four things that really drive energy costs on a university campus. One is the number of square feet you have. One is the function of the space. The other is utility risks, and utility rates, and number four is weather. And like I mentioned before, I don't like to go to my accountants and talk about weather normalization. So we agreed to divide the risk between the energy program and the finance team. So our utility budget is increased in accordance with utility rates and the square footage we have. And then any changes in space or, you know, we actually had a really cold winter and a really hot summer here in Utah this past year. Any changes in the weather just get absorbed by the energy program, and that can actually hurt your numbers, but it helps your credibility in the long run if you're not claiming savings that they're not seeing.
Thanks for adding that. Last parting question is, Ian, to you. Has IRMA changed any of the goals, or have you even gotten to that yet, the discussion in terms of, you know, resiliency goals or things like that sort of maybe change how you were approaching sustainability before?
Well, we're still kind of digging out, so it's a little early to go back to the table and start coming up with goals as people are assessing damage. But as a city, we're in Florida, right? We're prone to these type of events, and we're also a place that people will come from the coastal cities as they're evacuating. So one of the things that we're doing on a larger scale is trying to be more resilient with our facilities, but also working with our citizens and our infrastructure to be able to handle the influx of people. And we're actually pretty used to doing that with the amount of tourists that we get every year too. So we're trying to enhance our solid waste programs, recycling programs, food waste, street infrastructure, bicycling routes, all of these other elements that allow people to move and get around and get the resources that they need, so that if there is an event, they have options, right?
Thank you so much, Dana. Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Ian. I thought it was a great conversation, and I think there's a couple of pieces in there I'd love to just have a whole other webinar discussion about some of the things that we just barely scratched the surface on. But thanks for taking time. I know you guys are all very busy, and I appreciate it. And also thanks for everybody for joining the webinar. We will be sending out a copy of the slides. There will be a recording as well.
Great, thank you for having me.
Yeah. Happy to help.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.